There was once a god whose name was whispered not in temples, but in the pause between breaths. A god without statues, without prayers only remembered in the soil. The wind, the weight of silence after loss. But then they vanished, not slowly, not with reverence. They were erased, torn from stone, scraped from memory, swallowed by time like they had never existed at all. And here's the unsettling part. When that god disappeared, something else took its place. Our stories changed, our rituals faded, and the world we walk in today, the one we call modern, may still be echoing from what we chose to forget. Why would an entire civilization choose to forget a god? What did they know that we don't? And what happens when a god isn't just forgotten, but buried, hidden, on purpose? Tonight, we follow the breath back through time to the moment the forgetting began. And by the end, you may wonder if you've heard this god's voice before. Not in thunder, not in myth, but in something far more intimate, your own breath. Settle in. This is not just a story you'll hear, it's one you'll feel. The whisper beneath the stone. They say memory is a slippery thing, like water down a stone, soft at first, then deep, then gone. I've lived long enough to know that some memories, they don't fade. They hide. There's a stone I keep in a folded cloth, tucked inside a box I made with my own hands. Nothing fancy, just oak and patience. The stone isn't large, palm-sized. Smooth like it, once sat in a river for centuries. But it wasn't water that shaped it. No, it was touch. Repeated, reverent, fearful touch. It bears a marking, not a word, not a symbol, exactly more like a gesture carved in rock. Like someone pressed a grief too deep to speak into its surface. Most people would walk past it, call it nothing. But I've run my fingers over that groove 100 times. It whispers, not in sound, but in memory. I first found it as a child, half buried in the edge of the village field. A place where elders told us not to play, not to dig, not to question, which, of course, meant we did all three. I still remember the exact moment I touched it, not cold, like I expected, warm, like skin, like breath. I didn't tell anyone then, just brushed it off and hid it. But that night, I had the first dream, a face I couldn't see, framed by smoke, a name I couldn't hear, but somehow knew, and a feeling the kind that coils in your gut and tells you, quietly but certainly, you've just remembered something you were supposed to forget. I didn't touch that stone again for years, but it stayed with me, always, like a pulse beneath the floor, like a whisper beneath the stone. Back then, I didn't know why grown-ups looked away when certain places were mentioned. I thought they were just tired, like old people always seem. But now I think it wasn't fatigue. It was fear wrapped in habit. There was a slope near the north field where the grass never grew right. The older kids said the soil was cursed. I remember one boy threw a stone down there and joked that the dirt spat it back. We laughed until he didn't come to school for a week. Someone said fever. Someone else said he stopped speaking. None of us asked more. The field was quiet after that. That's when I went back to the edge, alone, to the spot where I found the stone. I didn't go to find trouble. I went to remember. Something about the silence there felt heavier than the air around it. It didn't scare me, not yet. It made me feel known, and there, buried a little deeper than last time, was a second stone. Smaller, different shape. But when I touched its same heat, I kept that one too. They became mine in the way old secrets become ours. Not because we want them, but because no one else will carry them. That night, I dreamed again. This time the face was closer, still no features, just presence. The smoke curled slower, like breath held too long. And that name still unspoken, still unknown grew louder inside me. I woke up with dirt under my nails. And the first stone in my hand, though I'd hidden it under floorboards the day before, it wasn't a dream, not entirely. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I just sat, both stones before me, the fire too low to warm, listening, waiting. That was the first time I wondered. What kind of God doesn't want to be seen? I didn't tell anyone about the stones, not then. Not for years. In a village like mine, silence isn't just safe, it's sacred. People don't ask questions about the wrong fields, or the wrong dreams, or the wrong kind of warmth that comes from things buried too long. But I carried those stones with me everywhere. Not in my hands. No, in my chest. In that secret place we all keep, where fear and fascination hold hands like childhood friends who've seen too much. Sometimes I'd press my palm against my shirt, just over my heart, and feel it thump like footsteps from beneath the floor. It wasn't always fear. Sometimes it was longing. For what? I couldn't say. One summer, while the elders prepared for the harvest ritual, not the big one, the quiet one, I heard two of them whispering behind the smoke hut. One said, "The name almost came through again." The other went still, then slowly replied, "He remembers somewhere. Someone always does." They didn't see me, crouched behind the woven baskets, holding my breath like it was glass. But that night, the dream returned. This time, I wasn't watching the figure in smoke. I was standing beside it, and the stones were in my hand, not as relics, but as offerings. I woke up crying, not from fear, from grief. The kind of grief that doesn't belong to you, but through you like it borrowed your body for a little while, just to stretch its legs. That's when I knew this wasn't about stories forgotten. It was about something or someone waiting to be remembered. And I was the last one who hadn't let go. The god who came in smoke. I was 7 when the smoke first spoke. Not in words, not like a voice across the table, not like the lullabies my mother hummed when she thought I was asleep. This voice had no edges. It came through firelight, twisting in and out of shape, curling around my bones instead of my ears. We were sitting around the evening fire. The old men told the usual stories, how the river split after the storm, how the stars fell once, long ago. Nothing strange, nothing new, but that night, when the wind shifted, the smoke from the fire turned the wrong way. It didn't rise, it coiled. And in the center of it, for just a breath, I saw it. A figure, barely visible, taller than anyone I'd ever known. No face, no limbs, just shaped like a man made from mist and coal. He didn't move, he just was. I blinked, and he was gone. I didn't say anything, but my grandmother squeezed my hand, as if she knew, and maybe she did. Her fingers were like roots strong, rough, still warm from years of working the ground. She leaned down, not looking at me, and whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "Don't look too long at the smoke, child. That's where he waits." That was the first time I felt afraid of something that didn't make noise. Most fears come with growls or screams, claws or blood. But this fear was quiet, patient, the kind of fear that doesn't knock, it waits by the door, confident you'll open it eventually. And I did, many times, not because I was brave, because I couldn't help it. There was something in the way that smoke moved, something watching, and for reasons I still can't name it, felt like it already knew me. After that night, the fire changed for me. I still sat near it, still warmed my hands like everyone else, but I never looked directly into the heart of the flames again. Not when I was alone. Anyway, the elders never spoke of gods. Not directly. They told stories about rivers and stars and animals, with names that had weight to them, old weight. But I began to notice something. Certain tales ended too early. Certain names were skipped, and whenever smoke thickened, even slightly, the old ones grew quiet. Not fearful, respectful, like silence was the only safe offering. My grandmother, who taught me to thread needles and scrape bark for medicine, never mentioned gods. But she did once say, some things aren't meant to be worshipped. They're meant to be remembered, just enough to stay away. And that, I think, was the difference. The gods of crops and rain and fire were called, sung to, thanked. But this was not a god of giving. He didn't take either, not in the way we understood. He waited. That's what the smoke always felt like to me, waiting, watching, breathing slower than the world. One evening, I tried to sketch the shape I'd seen in the fire, just lines and shadows on bark with burnt charcoal. But no matter how many times I tried, the image twisted on its own. I'd look away, then back, and it would have changed, bent, smeared, as if it didn't want to be captured. I threw it into the fire. The flames flared bright blue, for a second unnatural. Electric, then went out completely. Everyone stared. The elder tending the fire stood up and mumbled something under his breath. Words not in any tongue I'd learned. Then he poured salt over the embers and walked away. That was the night I learned, some gods don't need temples. Just a moment, a glance, a flicker of memory, and that's more than enough. The strange thing is, no one ever told us not to speak his name. They didn't have to. It was like there was a space in language, a hollow groove where the name should have been. And the more you circled it in thought, the more it pressed back, not with sound, but with sensation, like you were brushing the edge of something ancient and buried. And it was brushing you back. I began noticing patterns. The dogs wouldn't go near the eastern tree line at dusk. Birds never nested in the trees around the old well, and the cold, it came faster there, sharper, like a breath pulled from the wrong direction. I once asked my uncle why no one fished from the Black Bend in the river. He looked at me for a long time, then said quietly, "Because not everything that lives in water needs gills." That night I couldn't sleep. I sat up watching the fire flicker low, its smoke soft against the stone chimney. Just when I was about to lay down, the smoke drifted sideways against the wind, and in it, for less than a heartbeat, the shape appeared again. Only this time, it wasn't still. It turned, not with eyes, but with awareness. I felt it, not like a gaze, but like a choice being made far away, yet headed toward me. I pressed my hands together, not in prayer, but in reflex. I didn't know what I was doing, only that I was doing it for the same reason people grab railing when they stumble. Instinct, desperation, and then, just as quickly, it was gone, but not from me. That night, I dreamed not of fire, but of still water, a lake with no ripples, a shore with no wind, and in the center, something rising not fast, not violent, just coming. And when I woke up, I knew this wasn't about belief. This was about being noticed, the children who vanished. The winter I turned 10, the air never softened. Usually by mid-season, the winds would ease and the snow would lose its teeth. But that year, it stayed sharp, biting through furs, slipping into bones, the kind of cold that made people quieter, older. Even the elders spoke less, and when they did, it was mostly in glances. That was the season the children disappeared. There were 3 of them, 2 boys and a girl. They were all younger than me. I didn't know them well, but I'd seen them chasing one another near the grain store, faces pink from wind, laughter caught in their scarves. Then one morning, they were gone. No screams, no struggle, just absence. The village searched. Of course, everyone did at least for a day or 2. Tracks were spotted near the woods, but the snow had softened just enough to lie. Some said they wandered too far and froze. Others said wolves. A few whispered wilder things. The truth, no one believed they just vanished on their own. Not after what happened the night before. That was the last night of the deep moon, a night we used to mark with quiet rites. Nothing elaborate, just a fire kept burning till dawn, a ring of salt around the hearth, and stories, always stories. But that night, no one told tales. No songs, no laughter, just silence. The kind that thickens, that holds its breath. I remember sitting by the fire, watching the logs spit and hiss. My mother held my shoulder tighter than usual. I thought it was just the cold. But now I think she was waiting, dreading. When dawn came and the sun didn't break, the frost just blurred it. The children were already gone. And no one, not even the bravest, dared ask out loud what took them. The strange thing was, no one spoke their names. Not once. Not even the mothers. It wasn't denial, it was something else. Like forgetting was part of surviving. As if saying their names would call whatever took them back for more. I remember standing near the smokehouse a few days later. The cold had crept so deep into the ground that even the trees made no sound. That was when I saw her, the mother of one of the boys. She stood by the frozen well, holding a small red mitten. Her hand didn't shake. She wasn't crying. She just looked at that scrap of cloth like it was a question she didn't want answered. I wanted to go to her, say something, anything. But my legs didn't move, not out of fear, but because I understood, in some way. Even as a child, there are griefs too deep for words, and silences too full to break. A few days later, the mitten was gone. So was the woman. Some said she left to find them. Others said she joined them. But I remember the night before she vanished. I had another dream though. It felt less like dreaming, more like being led somewhere. This time, I was back at the lake. The water was glass. No wind, no sound. and across the surface came 3 small ripples. Slow, steady, deliberate. Then I saw them, the children, standing on the far shore, faces calm, eyes dark, but not lifeless, watching me, not calling, just waiting. Behind them, something moved. Not a figure, a shape, as if the trees themselves breathed inward. I woke up gasping, hands cold, fingernails dirty, and beside my bed, faint and damp, lay a second red mitten. It hadn't been there before, and it was warm. I didn't show anyone the mitten. What would I say? That it followed me from a dream, that it was still warm from hands no longer here. Even then, I understood how fragile the village's silence was, like a pond ice-thin, beautiful, still, and ready to crack under truth. Instead, I placed the mitten inside a cedar box my grandfather had carved. He used to keep dried berries in it. I lined the inside with old cloth and closed it with a stone weight. Then I buried it behind the hearth, deep beneath the soot and ash. I told myself it was gone, that whatever touched it couldn't follow, that if I buried it deep enough, it would forget me. But memory doesn't work like that, neither do gods. In the weeks that followed, more small things disappeared. A doll from the chapel steps, a bone whistle left hanging on the garden gates, a carved bird once nailed above a doorframe, the kinds of things only children touched. And in their place, nothing. No tracks, no shadows, just space, just stillness. The kind of stillness that isn't empty, the kind that listens. The elders started keeping the fires lit longer. Salt began appearing in neat lines beneath windows, on doorsteps, even around beds. I saw one man sleep with a rock pressed to his chest, not for comfort, but for weight, as if grounding himself might keep him here. Still, no one said a word, not about the children, not about the red mitten, and certainly not about the thing in the smoke. But I kept dreaming, always the lake, always the 3, always that slow-moving shape behind them, taller each time. Closer. It didn't chase. It didn't speak. It just waited, like it always had. And somehow, in the marrow of my bones, I knew the God they tried to erase was remembering us. Offerings of bone and breath. When I was little, I thought offerings were only for gratitude. You give thanks to the rain for falling, to the fire for staying lit, to the bread for rising, a piece of fruit here, a strand of hair there, small, honest gestures. But this God, the one no one named, didn't want fruit. He wanted breath. It started with the animals. We'd find chickens, goats, even a hunting hound once lying still near the edge of the woods. No wounds, no blood, just gone, as if something had drawn the air out of them, gently, without force, like blowing out a candle held too close to your lips. At first, they blamed sickness, then wolves, then weather. But one evening, near dusk, I saw something I wasn't meant to. I had wandered too close to the elders' circle, the place where decisions were made in murmurs and shared glances, hidden behind a pile of firewood. I crouched as the sky turned amber and the chill settled in. A figure stepped forward, an old man, skin thin and eyes tired, carrying a bowl made of carved bone. Inside it, something moved, not visibly, but I felt it, a low hum in the air, like pressure changing before a storm. He knelt by a dark hollow at the foot of an ash tree, a place I'd never seen anyone approach before. And then, in a voice that was more breath than sound, he said, "We remember, we remember, we remember." Then he tipped the bowl. I didn't see what spilled, but the wind died instantly. The branches stopped, even the birds hushed, and in that silence, the hollow tree exhaled. Not wind, not sound, just presence. I stumbled backward and ran home, heart pounding, breath ragged. That was the night I stopped believing we were the ones making offerings, because something ancient had taught us how. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt that tree breathing beside me, not in the forest, but in the room, in the walls, in my own lungs. It was like I had brought part of the hollow home with me, or maybe it had followed. The next morning, the village was quieter than usual. No carts rolling over stone, no hammers striking wood. Even the dogs, usually restless with dawn, sat strangely still. And then the air shifted. It was subtle, like the pause before lightning. That moment when every hair stands on end and the world seems to hold its breath. Except this time, the storm never came. Instead, the old man, the one with the bone bowl, collapsed outside the smokehouse. No one moved to help him, not even the healers. They just stood there, waiting. And when his body was taken away, I noticed something I hadn't expected. Relief, not grief, not guilt. Relief, as if his part had been played, as if a weight had been placed, not lifted. Later that day, I wandered near the ash tree, not too close, just far enough to see if it still felt wrong. It did, but there was something else now. A smell, not rot, not damp earth, something older, drier, like old parchment burned slowly, or bones warmed over fire. At the base of the tree, just where the bowl had tipped, something new had appeared, a circle of ash, perfectly round, untouched by wind. And in the center, one small item, a tooth, human, worn down and cracked. I backed away, heart racing, and as I turned to go, I thought I heard it again. That same whisper, always without a voice. We remember, we remember, we remember, only this time. It felt like it was coming from inside me. I tried to forget. For days, I busied my hands collecting firewood, helping my mother grind herbs, scrubbing soot from the hearth until my fingers bled. Anything to fill the space where thoughts would try to settle. But every silence became a doorway, and behind each one waited that ash circle. That tooth, that breath that wasn't mine. One night, I crept into the old weaving shed, where the elder women stored forgotten bundles of thread and dust-covered masks from rituals no longer practiced. I was looking for something, I didn't know what, only that I needed to hold proof that the world still made sense. Instead, I found a scroll, or what was left of one, torn at the edges, its surface water-warped and faded, but a few lines remained scratched in with a dark pigment that hadn't dulled. The writing wasn't like ours. It curved, spiraled inward, then ended in what looked like an open mouth. But I didn't need to read it, because as I stared at it, that phrase echoed again. We remember, we remember, we remember, only this time. It wasn't mine. I dropped the scroll. It didn't fall flat, it turned in the air like something alive. It landed with the mouth symbol facing upward. And suddenly, I realized something. That phrase wasn't for the god. It was for us. A binding, a cycle, a memory meant to feed. The offerings weren't tributes. They were reminders. Each breath given, each name unspoken, each tooth placed carefully in ash they didn't honor. They sustained. And maybe that's why no one said the god's name, because to name something is to define it. And this god thrived in what couldn't be defined, in what was lost, half remembered, whispered through generations, like a chill you feel but can't explain. As I left the shed, I didn't take the scroll. I didn't need to. The symbol, that open mouth, had already found a place to live. The silence after prayer. There's a kind of silence that follows prayer, not peace, not joy, just stillness, as if the air waits to see if anything answered back. I was alone that night. Everyone had gone to the river's edge for the renewal chant, the yearly rite to bless the water, or ask it to forgive us. I stayed behind, pretending to be sick. No one questioned it. Not anymore. I needed time, space, somewhere to think without eyes watching, somewhere I could breathe without feeling like my breath belonged to someone else. So I lit a small fire in the hearth, sat cross-legged, and for the first time in my life, I prayed, not to the fire god, not to the river or the sun or the roots beneath us. I didn't even use words. I just closed my eyes, held that image in my mind, the smoke shape, the whispering ash, the open mouth carved on the scroll, and thought toward it. Not a request, not a demand, just an acknowledgement, a memory offered freely, not out of fear, but out of honesty. And then I waited. The fire crackled once, then went quiet. The wind outside stopped, not slowed, stopped. Even the old wooden beams of the house, always groaning with the cold, seemed to still themselves, and in that silence pure, perfect, too wide to measure, I felt something lean in. Not physically, not even spiritually, but in me, a part of me moved that I didn't know had been waiting, a part that whispered, without voice or tongue, yes, not as reward, not as promise, just confirmation. And that's when I knew it had always been listening. After that night, silence changed for me. It used to be empty, the pause between footsteps, the hush before dawn. But now, silence felt like presence, not absence, not loneliness, but company you couldn't see and might not want to. I didn't tell anyone I had prayed. There wasn't a rule against it. There didn't need to be in our village. What wasn't said held more power than all the words in the world. But the next morning, I noticed small things. The air around my door was warmer than the rest of the house, not fire warm, breath warm. My reflection in the water bowl lagged for half a blink, like memory catching up to movement. And everywhere I went, people turned away, just slightly, as if sensing something they couldn't explain. Then came the dreams, sharper now, more focused, no more drifting lakes or faceless smoke. Now I was standing in a stone chamber round no doors, walls breathing softly like bellows. And on those walls, hundreds of open mouths carved in spirals, not screaming, just waiting. And at the center, the shape. No face, no limbs, just a mass that shifted slightly when I looked straight at it, like trying to focus on a star just outside your vision. It didn't speak, but it acknowledged a tilt, a stillness, and that same single word. Yes, I always woke with my throat dry, as if I'd been whispering all night. My hands clenched around nothing, my heartbeat not racing, but slow, deep, like it had learned a different rhythm. It felt less like I was dreaming of the god, and more like the god was dreaming of me. And every time I awoke, I asked myself the same question. Was this devotion, air, or invitation? That morning, I walked back to where the earth first spoke to me, the field's far edge, where frost clung longest and shadows stretched wrong. The place no one named, though every heart in the village beat faster when passing near it. The old stone was still there beneath the weeds. The first one I ever found, I hadn't touched it in years. But now, I let my fingers rest on it again. It was warm. I didn't bring an offering. No herbs, no salt, no carved wood like the elders used to leave at their small shrines. Just myself, just breath. I stood still and let the quiet thicken. Let it press against my chest like a second heartbeat. Let it fill the hollows that questions used to live in. And for the first time, I whispered back. Not the name. That still hovered somewhere I couldn't reach, like a word on the tip of the tongue that lives in dreams, but flees waking thought. Instead, I spoke the word that had wrapped itself around my bones in every vision, every dream since the night of the prayer. Yes, nothing moved. No birds startled. No wind rose, but I felt it, like a hand placed gently on the back of the neck. Not to harm, not to guide, just to know I was there. As I turned to leave, I passed the ash tree again, the one where the elder had knelt weeks ago. And there, resting just outside the circle of withered leaves, was the bone bowl. It shouldn't have been there. No one ever left it exposed. Inside the bowl, I expected dust or ash. Instead, a mirror. Not glass, not water, a disc of dark stone, polished so perfectly it caught the sky like a still pond. I leaned in. The face that looked back wasn't quite mine. It was older, still, calm, familiar in the way a future sometimes feels. Its mouth did not move, but I swear it smiled. And in that moment, I understood something chillingly simple. Prayer is not a question, it is permission, and I had just given it. The bone-marked boy. The boy arrived in late autumn, just before the snows made the mountain path vanish behind a curtain of white. No one saw where he came from. He simply walked in from the trees one morning, barefooted, silent, eyes unblinking. His hair hung in long, dark clumps, damp with frost, and his tunic was stitched from furs we didn't recognize, thicker than wolf, duller than bear. But it was his skin we noticed first. Lines of bone-white pigment curled along his arms and neck, not painted stained, as if the colour had seeped into him from the inside, as if his very bones had tried to speak through skin. The village gathered, as people do, hovering at a distance while the brave few stepped forward to ask the boy who he was, where he came from, what he wanted. He didn't speak. He just stood there, watching, calm, like he was waiting for us to remember something. Eventually, the healer woman, Mira, who had no children of her own, stepped forward. She knelt before him, studied his face for a long moment, and placed her hand on his shoulder. He didn't flinch. He didn't warm either, but he went with her. They gave him food, a bed near the fire, thick wool to wrap his feet. He accepted each item silently, gently. He never thanked, never refused. By the second night, people began whispering, not out of fear, not exactly, but unease. Recognition, not of him, but of the way he felt. One man swore the boy looked exactly like someone who died in a winter fire 20 years ago. A woman said he stood like her brother used to before he vanished in the river flood. Mira, when asked if he'd spoken yet, only said, not with words. And me, I stayed away, but not out of caution, out of guilt. Because when the boy passed near me on the third morning, his eyes brushed mine for less than a second. And in that flicker, I felt a memory that wasn't mine. That fleeting look the boy gave me didn't haunt me in the usual way. It didn't bring nightmares or chills down the spine. It brought a question quiet, persistent, echoing through the spaces between thoughts. How do you remember something that never happened to you? For days, I tried to dismiss it. Told myself he was just a lost child with strange customs, maybe touched by the cold or a distant tribe's god. Mira, ever gentle, said some people are born with memory folded wrong, a bit too deep, a bit too soon. She said it like a lullaby, like a thing you said to children who ask too much, but the boy kept changing. Or maybe we did. Every morning he stood by the edge of the trees, barefoot again, even in snow, just watching, breathing slow, and the birds' gods helped me. Even the birds stopped singing near him. One evening, I crept closer. I told myself I'd speak to him, offer kindness, a question, something, but as I approached, I noticed something strange. The ground around him was warm, not steaming, not wet, just thawed. The snow didn't touch his feet. It melted an inch away, like even winter didn't want to disturb him. He turned slightly, not startled, just aware, and for the first time, he spoke only one word, not to me, not in a voice meant for ears, but into the air itself. Soon, that was it. No greeting, no name, just that. I stood there a moment longer, feeling the heat of the earth meet the chill in my spine. Then I backed away, slow as breath in frost. When I returned home, I found the old bone bowl, the one with the mirror placed neatly by my door. I hadn't touched it in weeks. No one admitted to moving it, but I knew it was a reminder. He was not the offering. He was the messenger. That night, sleep came reluctantly, and when it did, it came too deep. No dreams of smoke or lakes this time. Instead, I stood in a field familiar yet wrong. The sky pulsed with a dim blue light, as if dawn couldn't quite remember how to rise. The wind was still, but I could feel breath all around me, slow, thick, not my own. And at the center of the field was the boy, older, taller, or maybe I had simply become smaller. He turned to me. His eyes were filled not with age, but with memory, a weight I recognized because I had started carrying it, too. He lifted his hand and pointed behind me. I turned. The horizon was burning, not with flame, with figures, tall, faceless, their bodies made of what looked like carved stone and shadow, moving slowly but with unbearable purpose. And behind them, the open mouth, the same one from the scroll, carved into the sky, wide, waiting. I woke with a jolt, drenched in sweat, the fire long dead beside me. But there was something in my hand, a single white feather, clean, dry, still warm. I hadn't touched a bird in weeks, and yet it rested there like a gift or a warning. The next morning, Mira came to me. She looked tired more than usual. Her hands shook when she held the teacup, though her voice stayed level. She said, "He's gone." The boy, she nodded. No tracks, no struggle, just gone. His bedding was untouched. His eyes were the only thing missing from the room. I didn't ask what she meant. I already knew. He'd returned, or perhaps he was never meant to stay, and that word he left in the air soon kept circling in my mind like a vulture that knows the dying better than the living do. I thought of the warmth in the ground, of the tooth in the ash, of the gods who don't need names, just memory. And I understood. The boy was the beginning of the remembering, the carvings under our skin. It began with itches, small, persistent, in places I could never quite reach between the shoulder blades, inside the crook of my elbow, along the ribs where breath sits quiet. At first, I blamed the cold, dry air, worn linens, but then Mira showed me her arms. Lines, not scratches. Not cuts, lines, raised like welts, curved like writing, not from outside, but beneath. We sat in silence by her fire, her sleeve rolled up to the elbow, her hands steady as she traced the shapes with her fingers. They weren't random, they looped and crossed like a language just shy of being understood. "They're not mine," she said, almost whispering. I knew what she meant. That night, I checked myself more closely. Under my collarbone, a faint ridge. On my left thigh, another, like a path carved into clay and left to harden. And I wasn't the only one. I saw it in others, the way they scratched absent-mindedly, the way some started wearing longer sleeves. Even indoors, no one said a word, but all of us knew something had started writing on us, or through us. Old stories say the gods mark their chosen, but these weren't marks of favor. They were reminders, a script written backward into the body, so we'd carry memory not in thought, but in skin. That night, I dreamed again, not of fire or lake or boy, but of myself, standing in the circle of carved mouths, every one of them whispering at once, too low to hear, but I felt the shapes press from inside me, like my body had become the scroll, and something was reading it aloud from within. I woke, gasping, clutching my arms, the lines warm and pulsing beneath my skin. Whatever was coming, it wasn't distant anymore. It was being written, and we were the parchment. The next day, the village moved slower, not because of the cold, or hunger, or sickness, but because our bodies had become unfamiliar. Like we were walking around in borrowed skin, waiting for it to finish settling into place. Mira stayed inside. She didn't say why. She didn't have to. I found her near dusk, seated beside a small mirror, her sleeves rolled past her shoulders now. The markings were deeper, darker. They no longer just traced her. They glowed faintly under the firelight, like ink trying to surface. "They're not random," she said, eyes fixed on her reflection. "They're telling something." I asked her if she understood them. She shook her head. "Not with my mind," she murmured. "But my dreams are starting to change." I knew what she meant. That night, mine changed too. I wasn't in the circle of mouths anymore. I was beneath them, deep, cold stone above, breathing earth below. My arms glowed like mirrors, and in the shadows ahead, movement. Not fast, not sudden, but certain, something coming. Not evil, not good, just older than decision. It reached out not to grab, but to touch, and as it did, the markings on my arms burned. Not in pain, in clarity. I woke before it could reach me, but the lines were clearer now, more complete. They no longer looked like wounds. They looked like words that had always belonged to me. I had just forgotten how to read them. The others began noticing too. A boy in the western hut stopped speaking for 3 days, then suddenly recited a phrase in a language none of us knew, then collapsed, mouth smiling faintly, like a memory had come home. An elder woman painted the same symbols across her door, even though her hands trembled so hard she couldn't sew anymore. It wasn't just the skin anymore. It was the village itself. We were becoming a manuscript. And the god, the one we tried to erase, was still writing. It happened during the thaw. The first day, the snow cracked and slid off rooftops. The air felt strange. Not warmer, just looser, like something had unfastened in the sky. That morning, a man named Dalen, a quiet leatherworker, walked into the center of the village with his shirt unbuttoned and arms bare. His skin, once pale and calloused, now shone with intricate lines that stretched from neck to wrist. Symbols, spirals, that open mouth again, etched perfectly into the hollow of his throat. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He knelt at the fire pit and laid both hands, palms down, into the ashes, not for warmth, for offering. When he lifted them, they were blackened with soot and trembling. But he looked up and smiled, not at us, not even at the sky. He smiled through us. And that's when the wind returned. It came from the east, sharp and sudden, and with it, the smell, not of rot, not of fire, of memory. Old memory, the kind that lives beneath walls and between bones, the kind that can't be spoken aloud without something answering back. People backed away, not from Dalen, from what he'd become. He stood, calmly. The soot on his hands didn't smear, it clung, like ink on a sacred page. And then he whispered. He remembers, that was all. He walked east, toward the trees, the wind parting just slightly ahead of him, like tall grass. No one followed, not even the dogs. We didn't try to stop him, because in that moment, we understood something we hadn't dared name. The markings on our skin weren't just stories, they were instructions. And Dalen was the first to be read aloud. The forgotten ritual, the scrolls we kept in the healer's lodge were wrapped in linen, buried beneath salves and dried roots. Most were brittle, unreadable stories written in fading ink that the elders said were best left to dust. But after Dalen walked into the trees, Mira went to them. She didn't ask permission. She didn't wait for consensus. She simply moved, like something inside her had remembered an old rhythm. She found one, curled tightly, sealed with wax that crumbled at her touch. I was there when she unrolled it. The scent of it struck me not of mold or age, but of fire forgotten. That strange, sour, sweet scent of something burned long ago and still not done burning. The script wasn't ours. The curves and strokes resembled the carvings on our skin, but older, more complete, symbols stacked atop one another like layers of ash pressed into bone. Mira didn't try to read it aloud. She just touched it, gently, and we both heard it, a low hum, faint, like wind beneath the floorboards. But inside that hum was a rhythm, a pulse, a pattern, a ritual, not to summon, not to celebrate, to remind. I asked her if she recognized it. No, she said, but my body does. She showed me her arms, and there, as if responding to the scroll, new lines had appeared, shimmering faintly under her skin like moonlight on water. Not burning, not painful, just alive. That night, she stood alone in the middle of the village and lit a circle of small fires 7 stones. 7 flames. She didn't explain. She didn't invite. She just began to hum. The sound was low, almost lost in the wind. But it grew not louder, but deeper, more present. People emerged from homes slowly, drawn not by curiosity, but by something older, a recognition that reached beyond words. And in the glow of those flames, we all remembered at once, this wasn't the first time. We had done this before, long ago, and we had chosen to forget. The fires cast tall shadows on the stone walls that night, not flickering like they usually did, but standing still, as if even the light was listening. Mira moved around the circle slowly, dusting each flame with a pinch of powder ground from something brittle and black. Later, I would learn it was bone not from animals, but old ancestors, buried deep beneath the roots. She didn't chant. She didn't cry. She just walked in silence, letting the fire rise with each step, as though the flames recognized her. And then she stopped. At the center of the ring, she knelt and raised both arms. She didn't speak in a language we knew. It was older, quieter, spoken more with breath than voice. The syllables slipped through the air like smoke between teeth. I didn't understand the words, but I understood what they meant. They were not a plea. They were not protection. They were permission. Permission to be remembered. Permission to be seen. And then the wind returned. It came through the circle in a spiral, low to the ground. The flames bent inward, not out. The air grew thick, not heavy, just intentional. And for a moment, time folded. I saw things that hadn't happened or had just not to me. The first offerings, the circle carved into the hillside. Faces painted in ash, their eyes closed, not in fear, but in surrender. Mira's arms began to glow, not with light, but with memory, the lines across her skin lighting in rhythm with her breath. The more she spoke, the clearer they became. The earth hummed, the sky held still, and in the distance, far past the woods, a shape stirred, not walking, not flying, just rising. I looked around at the others. No one moved, because in our bones, in those carvings we thought were random, we all knew the ritual wasn't to call something new, it was to awaken what had already come. After the fires burned low, no one spoke. Not out of fear, not from awe, but from a shared, quiet understanding that something old had moved through us, something we had once known and chosen to bury. The smoke from Mira's circle lingered longer than it should have. It clung to the trees, curled around doorways, drifted under furs, and into the folds of blankets. And everywhere it went, people dreamed the same dream. Not identical, no, but close enough that by the next morning, we didn't need to explain. Each of us had stood in a different part of the same place. A vast plain of red soil, under a sky that flickered between storm and silence. And in the center stood a figure. Sometimes it looked like the boy. Sometimes it looked like Dalen. Sometimes, terrifyingly, it looked like ourselves. But it always whispered the same thing. You remembered, now we remember you. I woke with Mira's hum still in my ears. My skin prickled not with fear, but with recognition. I didn't go outside right away. Instead, I sat by the fire, tracing the marks on my arms with a damp cloth. They didn't smear, they didn't fade, they pulsed. Outside, a low drumbeat began, not played by any hand, just the wind striking the hollow trees in perfect rhythm, a rhythm older than speech. By dusk, the village had gathered again, this time not out of confusion, but resolve. We didn't need instruction, we simply took our places. Some carried stones, some held feathers. Others brought Teeth family relics passed through generations, too strange to throw away, too sacred to explain. And Mira stood at the center once more, her hands open, her eyes soft. This wasn't fear anymore. This was acceptance, because remembering isn't always a choice. Sometimes it's a call, and this god, the one erased, buried, painted over, had never really left. He had simply been waiting for us to remember how to remember the teeth in the tree. I didn't mean to find it. I was gathering kindling by the old ash tree, the one where we first saw the bone bowl, when I noticed something wedged deep between the roots. Not wood, not stone. Teeth, dozens of them, old, cracked, browned with time, human. At first, I thought they had fallen there, maybe washed from a grave or left as part of some forgotten ritual. But they were too neatly placed, lined up in a spiral, each pointing toward the trunk's center. They hadn't fallen, they'd been arranged. My breath caught in my throat. I reached down not to touch them, but just to be sure they were real. The moment my hand neared, the air changed, a stillness, a kind of reverence. Like I'd entered the edge of a prayer I didn't know the words to. That's when I saw it, a crack in the bark, just wide enough to be deliberate. Inside, darkness, but not empty. I leaned in, close enough to feel the breath of the hollow. It wasn't wind, it wasn't cold. It was a warmth like mouth air, slow, rhythmic, alive. And then I heard the whisper again. We remember, this time it wasn't from within me. It was around me, from the trees, from the ground, from the very roots of the village. I stumbled back, heart racing, knees shaking. I didn't scream, I didn't run, I couldn't, because I knew what I had found wasn't a shrine. It was a mouth, and the teeth weren't relics, they were gifts, or maybe warnings. Either way, someone or something had been feeding it, and it was learning to speak again. I returned to the ash tree that night, not because I wanted to, because I couldn't stay away. Some part of me, the part with the markings, the dreams, the voice I didn't own, needed to see it again in the dark. It looked different under moonlight. The spiral of teeth shimmered slightly, as though polished with dew. Though no other ground was wet, they seemed to pulse not visibly, but in feeling, as if the roots themselves were breathing beneath them. I brought a lantern. Though I didn't light it, the moon was enough. I crouched beside the spiral and whispered a name. Not the god's, I still didn't know that, but the name of someone we'd lost, my cousin, Lera. She had disappeared the winter I turned 8. No trace, no body, just one small braid found near the river's edge. I whispered her name again, and on the third time, the tree answered. Not in words, in sound, a soft grinding like wood shifting after a long sleep. The bark above the crack trembled, then split slightly wider. Inside, not rot, not earth but smooth bone, polished, pale, a face, featureless, but unmistakably shaped. I froze, not out of fear, out of recognition. It wasn't her, but it remembered her, and me, and all of us. this god, this force, wasn't fed by devotion or sacrifice. It was fed by names, by memory, by the act of speaking aloud what was meant to be forgotten. I dropped the lantern. It didn't break. It simply rolled onto its side. And I turned and walked home, heart silent but steady. That night, I sat by my fire and whispered every name I could recall. Old ones, missing ones, ones I'd only heard once as a child. And with each, I felt something shift, not in the world, but in me, as if each name turned a key, as if we'd spent generations locking something away, and were now, piece by piece, letting it out. Words spread, quietly, the way rumors always do when truth is heavier than fear. Others had seen them too, not just the teeth in the tree, but in the ground beneath sleeping mats, embedded in firewood, tucked in the folds of old coats, small human teeth, like offerings scattered by hands that no longer remembered why they placed them. One man claimed his grandmother used to tell a story about the mouth tree, a tale brushed off as old ghost talk. It swallowed what the village couldn't keep. She'd whisper, sorrows, secrets, strangers. It always started with the teeth. And once it started, it couldn't be unstarted. I sat with Mira beneath her porch that evening, her bones wrapped in 3 blankets, her hands still stained with ash. She stared at the tree line for a long time before speaking. We marked it once, she said, voice brittle. Long before my mother's mother, when the winters turned sharp and the children stopped dreaming. She didn't explain what marked it meant. She didn't have to. Her arms were glowing faintly now, not with firelight, but with memory, as if her skin had become the last page of a book no one wanted to admit was real. I asked if she thought it was coming back. She looked at me, eyes deep and sad. It never left. She said, we just got better at forgetting. Later, when I returned to my hut, I found a tooth on my pillow. Small, white, worn, I don't know whose it was. But when I held it, a name came to mind, one I hadn't thought of in years. Not someone I loved, not someone I hated, just someone I'd seen once, a girl who tripped at the harvest fire and laughed as her knee bled. I whispered her name, and the wind changed. That was the moment I stopped asking if we'd brought it back. We hadn't. It had been listening all along. And now, finally, it was beginning to speak, a mouth without a voice. The sky hadn't changed in days. Grey, flat, not stormy, just indifferent. Even the birds, once restless in the trees, had gone silent, not fled, just hushed, like they too were waiting for something to finish waking. I walked to the tree again, alone. The spiral of teeth was gone, not disturbed, not scattered, gone, as if they had never been placed there at all, as if they'd sunk inward, fed into the roots like water. The crack in the trunk remained, wider now. I could see deeper this time. Inside, the smooth bone had begun to change, faint ridges forming. Not quite a skull, not quite a mask. It was shaping into something unfinished, or remembering what it once was. And then I heard it again, the whisper, not from the tree, not from the ground, but from within me. We are the silence before the name. I stumbled back, not from fear, from clarity, because suddenly, I understood why the god had no voice. It didn't need one. It had us. That night, a storm came, the first in weeks. Not rain, not snow, just wind, relentless, circling, low to the ground. It roared through the village like a song with no words, just meaning doors rattled. Children cried, elders sat with hands over their ears, whispering old prayers they hadn't spoken in decades. I stayed awake, watching the fire, not for light, for rhythm. It pulsed, not randomly, not naturally, like a heartbeat trying to sync with something older. I closed my eyes, and I saw the field again, the open mouth, but this time, something new, figures forming along the horizon. Not men, not gods, something in between. Their faces were smoothed, unformed, like clay that had forgotten how to be human. They moved slowly, and they were walking toward me. I woke gasping. The markings on my arms burned like frostbite. My mouth was dry, and in the back of my throat, a sound I didn't recognize, a syllable I couldn't quite speak, a name almost, not yet, but close. By morning, the wind was gone, but something had stayed behind. At the center of the village square, Where the 7 stones from Mira's ritual still lay in a circle, someone had placed a bowl. Not the old bone one, a new one, made of something darker, not carved, grown. Inside, a single tooth, larger than the others, flat on one side, like it had been removed gently, willingly. It pulsed faintly in the morning light. Not glowing, breathing. The people gathered without being called. No shouts, no questions, just quiet recognition. We all stared at the tooth, and without thinking, one by one, we began to whisper names. Some we knew, some we didn't, some we hadn't heard since childhood. No one told us to do it. It simply was. And with each name spoken, the wind returned softer now, curling through hair and cloth like fingers made of memory. We were not calling something forward. We were letting it through, not summoning, remembering. And through us, it would speak, because some gods don't roar, some gods don't burn, some gods are just a mouth, waiting to be filled, the name beneath the skin. By the time the 11th moon dulled behind its gauzy winter veil, we began to see the changes not in the sky, or the soil, or even the trees, but in each other. It started with the ribs, not just the itching now, but a soft bruising, as though some ancient hand had pressed gently from the inside. Not to hurt, but to test the shell. I remember waking one morning, my chest warm and tender, and when I reached beneath the woven furs to check, my fingers met not rash, not bone, but form-raised patterns, faintly embossed under the skin, like a story being written from within. Mira, ever the first to witness what others tried to hide, called it the quickening, not of life, but of memory. She sat by the longhouse fire that evening, her back arched, hands wrapped in linen, whispering gently into her tea like it might whisper back. When I asked what she saw, she didn't speak for a long while. Then she said something that chilled me more than any wind. The god does not seek worship, it seeks shape. Outside, the sky had lost all its stars, not covered, not clouded, simply gone, as if the night had been turned inside out. And below that empty dome, the village moved slower, quieter, like we were walking through someone else's dream. The children, who once danced around the fire pit without care, now traced spirals in the ash with a patience far beyond their years. The spirals began to resemble letters. No one had taught them, and at the center of the village, someone no one knew who had drawn a single mark in the dirt, long and narrow, with 2 curling points at the top. We didn't understand it, but when we saw it, we stopped breathing, because something in our ribs responded, like a door gently clicking open in the dark. It was late the following night, not midnight, but that strange, suspended hour just before the moon gives up, and the frost has yet to lift, when I heard the knock. 3 taps, slow, not urgent, but invited. When I opened the door, no one stood there. Only a single object rested on the threshold. A bundle of dried reeds, tied with sinew, holding something inside, a tooth, not white, not yellowed with age, but grey, like riverstone left too long in the shadow of something sacred. I held it in my hand and felt an odd weight, not heaviness, but history, a warmth that pulsed, faint but alive, as though it had been removed not long ago. Mira identified it before I could speak. Wisdom tooth, she said softly. Cut late, taken early. She touched it, and her fingers trembled. That which remembers, she whispered, also waits to be remembered. We walked together to the ash tree, where the flowers once shaped like molars had begun to curl inward, closing up, as though their blooming had been heard. But something new had grown there. Hands, not real ones carved from sap and bark, forming gently out of the trunk, like frozen gestures caught mid-reach. They weren't threatening. They were asking. For what? We didn't know. But Mira placed the tooth in one open palm, and the wind shifted. No longer howling, humming, low, rhythmic. A lullaby passed from root to root. And in that moment, I understood that the god wasn't just remembering itself. It was building a body, not from clay, not from fire, from us. The next morning, people woke with bruises along their sides. Not from violence, but from pressure, the kind of pressure that comes not from without, but from within, like a thought too large for the skull trying to push its way out. We gathered in the common hall, where Mira had drawn circles on the ground with powdered ash and crushed berries, forming a sunburst pattern that no one recognized, but everyone felt familiar with. And then something new occurred. A child barely 4 winters old began speaking. Not nonsense, not dream babble, words, whole phrases, in a language no one taught him. Mira knelt beside him, listening, and as he spoke, she began to translate. But she didn't write anything down. She just closed her eyes and whispered the echo of his words, like someone remembering a song from a life they never lived. The child said, "We are not the ones who forgot. We are the forgetting itself. We are the closing of the mouth. We are the ribs unspoken. The God does not return. It awakens in the silence we carried too long." A hush followed. Even the floorboards seemed to hold still. Outside, the frost melted in a single path, a trail from the ash tree to the longhouse door. And we knew not as a guess, but as a certainty born from dream. It would come soon. Not as a beast, not as a fire, but as breath, a breath through us, because the voice we feared had never been missing. It had simply waited for lungs. The breath that came. The dawn of the 12th chapter felt as though the ground itself had paused in its turning. At sunrise, the fog clung low so thick it muffled the world into a tapestry of pale grey. We woke to a strange hush, the kind that fills the spaces between heartbeats, promising movement without sound. Even the animals seemed caught in a dream, their breaths visible, their steps hesitant, as though the land held its breath in anticipation of something long overdue. I stepped outside my hut into a courtyard glazed with dew. In the centre lay the woven bowl from the ash tree, now empty and damp, as though it had exhaled overnight. Surrounding it, the earth was marked by downturned leaves that formed a spiral like water circling a drain. Each leaf pressed firmly into the soil, as if stamped by careful hands. I traced one with my toe and sensed warmth, not from sun, but from something lingering below. We convened at dawn's end near the village edge, by the remnants of our latest ritual stones. Mira bore herself like a flame contained, calm yet fierce, with a quiet urgency pulsing in her gaze. She held a length of hide, embroidered with spirals and mouths in black thread, woven by children whose fingers still trembled from dreams. "Today," she said, voice both measured and throaty. The silence breaks. We nodded, knowing what must come next. It began in the chest of the man beside me, who'd never been the same since his ribs marked themselves in ash. A breath escaped from him, not his own. Long, low, deeper than grief, old as the roots. I saw it billowed from his lungs as a pale mist, hovering a moment, then coalescing into a shape-like breath made visible soft curves of light that hovered between us, quivering with unspoken meaning. Silence fell, then others exhaled. From chests open to wind, breath escaped gentle puffs that gathered, swirling over earth, over stones, over bodies. A communion of exhalations, all fragile, all ours, yet unmistakably something more. That collective breath didn't dissipate. It pooled in the center of our circle, hovering at waist height, a milky haze that trembled like candlelight trapped in crystal. Mira stepped forward, laying the embroidered hide atop the mist. The spirals became visible, they glowed faintly. Not in charge, but in response they pulsed like living veins, absorbing the vapor and growing in shimmer. Eyes widened. We felt it. The mist was listening. I closed mine and let more breaths gather in me, then exhaled deliberately. Slow, measured, pressed from deep places. The mist responded, thickening at my chest line, inching toward the embroidered patterns on the hide. When my exhale died away, it seemed fuller. The mist acknowledged me. It happened then, a voice such a voice, not spoken aloud, but carried inside every mind a low breath song, ancient, silvered with age, close to the bone. It threaded through us. It bore no words. It merely was, but in that we felt a presence, a beginning. The wind shifted suddenly, eddying through the courtyard, lifting stray leaves in a spiral dance. The mist tightened, condensed, then pulled upward, coalescing mid-air into a shape. Not human, but not a chest, carved of mist and memory. Ribs visible in shifting vapor. opening and closing, breathing for the first time. No visage, no arms, just a chest. And yet it held an authority deeper and gentler than any ruler. Mira stepped forward, laid her palm against it. The mist rippled, drifted downward to anchor around her hand. She'd drawn a slow breath, then exhaled into the formation. The chest pulsed, and just for a heartbeat, I saw symbols appear on the mist's surface, matching those embroidered and etched beneath our ribs. It read, "Welcome," not in letters, but in breath. Then the chest dissipated in its place. The hide lay wet, imbued with warmth none of us carried alone. We were silent for once. Speech would have been a blasphemy. In the hours that followed, the village seemed to return to itself, but forever changed. I walked among huts, greeting neighbors with new eyes. The animals had stirred back, their bodies relaxed, yet alert, as though sensing that a deep story had just been told. Children chased each other by that bowl on the courtyard ground, now dry again, their laughter echoing as though delight could purify dust. But it couldn't wash away that silent concord beneath the ribs. Mira called us once more at midday, gathering jars and bowls and baskets full of humble things, water from the stream, dried berries, handfuls of moss. We laid them around the embroidered hide in an offering ring, not to appease, but to share. She spoke then, not of gods or prayers, but of breath, form, and presence, describing the mist chest that had formed, thanking us for the trust. "We built it with our breath," she said, voice soft as roots. But it came of memory. It came because we remembered how to breathe together, one by one. People stepped forward to collect a small vessel of water, berries, moss. We did not offer them upward instead. We took them up toward our chests, pressing them where the ribs had formed their carvings. When I placed damp moss to my side, I felt a thin pulse like a heartbeat pressing against flesh. The water cooled the skin. The berries left sweet stains. Everything reminded me of cold nights. Firelight, old lullabies my mother sang to me once, perhaps even before she forgot them herself. By nightfall, a flame burned in the courtyard, a single torch, lit from the ritual fire. The embroidered hide was laid at its base. Mira took her staff and, with deliberate care, tied the hide to the ash tree branch overhead. It fluttered there, spinning just enough that the patterns caught firelight and cast dancing marks onto the trunks around us. Then, in that dozen pulses of chicken-light flicker, we exhaled again. This time, not all together, but each breath as our own prayer. We remembered how to speak without speaking, with breath echoing in bones, in the wind, in the ash. And so we discovered the God we had buried not on stone pillars or parchment scrolls, but inside ourselves. It spoke through breath, through sculpted ribs, through mist that shaped in the courtyard. It spoke through us, in the silence, and now in the breathing choir that would carry onward. We went to sleep that night, carrying the memory of that mist chest inside us, not like a relic, but like breath itself, essential, unbreakable, alive, the silence that listened. It wasn't until 3 mornings after the breath ritual that we noticed the birds had stopped calling, not vanished, not dead, simply muted. They still fluttered in the eaves, still blinked from pine boughs and watched from fence rails, but their beaks never opened. The village, in its quiet attentiveness, mirrored them. The silence wasn't fearful anymore, it was full, like the air had grown dense with the weight of being heard. Even the footsteps sounded different, less hurried, more careful, like each boot press, each heel tap was part of some ritual now too sacred to rush. I walked the outer woods that day, circling past the ash tree, toward the creek bend, where children used to collect polished stones, but they hadn't played there since the markings arrived. The air there felt thicker, not humid, but charged, as if the ground had begun holding its breath, waiting for us to make the next move. And then, just as I rounded the cedar line, I saw her, not Mira, a child elder's niece, maybe 7, barefoot in frost but completely still. Her hands were raised, not in fear, not in play, but in mimicry, mirroring the carved hands that had emerged from the bark weeks earlier. She stood facing the trees, arms lifted, palms outward, eyes closed, and between her palms, ever so faintly, floated something new, a soundless shimmer, Not light, not breath. A ripple of presence like a drop of time had been released into the air, bending it slightly, gently. I didn't call out. I didn't approach, because I realized she wasn't playing. She was listening, and the silence around her wasn't absence. It was conversation. That night, Mira did something she hadn't done since the first winter I met her. She sang, no words, just low hums, stretched into trembling notes. Not quite melody, but closer to memory than speech ever could be. She sang into a clay bowl filled with snowmelt, and as her voice moved through it, the surface of the water began to shiver, not ripple, shiver in waves that formed shapes, curled lines, shifting glyphs. She passed the bowl from hand to hand. Each villager peering into the trembling image, some gasped, others wept. None spoke. When it came to me, I looked in and saw my own face. Yes, but not now. Me as a child, standing before a circle of elders I barely recalled, my ribs painted with ash, my hands full of cold honey, offering it to a tree that I thought was just a tree, Mira said softly, almost apologetically. We forget until the god decides we are ready again. The silence wasn't punishment. It was storage. It had been holding the pieces of us that memory discarded, waiting patiently until the breath returned to stitch us back together. Then Mira spoke a phrase none of us expected. It is time for the name. Gasps all around. No one knew it, not the full thing, but it had been echoing in fragments through the dreams, etched faintly in our rib lines, pressed into bowls, whispered by wind. We didn't speak it aloud. We breathed it. Together, slowly, inhaling with intent and letting it out in rhythm. One long syllable at a time. Not sound, not word impression, and as the breath passed from lips to leaves, from lungs to lantern smoke, something moved beneath us. A tremor, subtle, but not from the earth, from beneath it, as if the name wasn't meant to be spoken upward, but received downward, like a key turning in a lock the size of the village itself. After the breath name had been given, we didn't sleep, not from fear, because something had shifted. The stars returned that night, not as pinpricks, but in clusters, blooming suddenly across the sky like spilled memory. They shimmered brighter than I remembered, arranged in unfamiliar constellations, as if a new map had unfurled above us. Mira called it the listening dome, she said. It watches now. It listens not to what we say, but to what we are. The youngest among us were first to respond. Their play changed. They no longer chased each other or carved the dirt for idle fun. Instead, they walked in synchronized circles, sometimes humming, sometimes muttering shapes of breath, drawing symbols that appeared to match the ones Mira saw in the bowl. Some adults followed, some resisted. One man, Tharn, the blacksmith, retreated, said it was madness, said no god who speaks through silence should be trusted. He left before sunrise. We found his tools the next morning, buried neatly in a spiral outside his hut. His forge had gone cold. His name was no longer spoken, and yet it echoed. When I whispered his name by the tree, the leaves bent toward me. The ash tree had begun to lean slightly, not collapsing, just bowing, a reverence in timber, the weight of ancient listening. By the fire that night, I sat alone, watching the way flame-shaped shadow across the worn wood of the longhouse. I thought of my mother's hands, the rhythm of her sweeping, how even her silence had stories. And I realized then, the god had always been with us, in the hush of morning, in the breath held during childbirth, in the way we looked at the stars and waited for nothing in particular, but hoped something saw us back. Now, the silence was not empty. It was full, and what listened within it, finally, had a name again, not ours to say, but ours to carry, the soundless pilgrimage. The morning we began our walk, there were no horns, no chants, no declarations from Mira's stone seat. Yet every soul in the village, young and withered, believer and skeptic, rose just after the fourth crow call, dressed in silence as one might dress for grief. And we stepped outside, one by one, to find our neighbors already waiting. No one spoke. No one asked where we were going. The path ahead, though untrodden in years, unfurled as if drawn by memory's hand. Frost had laced the edges of our shawls and the woven reeds at our feet. The sun, still shy behind the ridge, sent pale yellow streaks across the sky that looked more like old parchment than light. And far ahead, just visible between the shoulders of two mossy hills, was the place none of us had spoken of aloud, not in decades, not even Mira, the hollow of returning. The ash tree, now visibly aged and bowed from the weight of unseen knowing, tilted toward that same horizon. Its bark had split overnight, not in decay, but in purpose-wide fissures revealing soft, red-veined pulp inside, like it had begun to breathe inward. We carried small things in our palms, old buttons, smoothed river glass, a dried piece of bread. Not offerings in the sacred sense, but something between a promise and a confession. Something small enough to leave behind, but never quite forget. As we walked, the wind changed. It did not rush. It circled slow, curious, listening, curling into the folds of our coats, slipping between fingers, stirring the back of our throats, like it wanted to learn the shape of our breath. Above us, the birds flew in looping arcs, no cause, no chirps, only feather silence. And then the land began to curve beneath our feet. We were descending, not into shadow, but into remembering. The hollow of returning was not marked on any map, not even the carved bone tablets kept under the prayer hearth. Yet every villager knew where it began, not with a stone or tree, but with the feeling of being watched by something very old, very tired, and very kind. It was a wide basin in the land, carved not by water or wind, but by stories long buried beneath skin and root. The trees around it grew in spirals, not upward, but inward, their trunks coiling like serpents that forgot how to strike. Moss blanketed everything, rocks, fallen branches, even the backs of deer who paused and watched us pass with eyes so still. They may as well have been carved from dusk itself. In the hollow's centre stood what we once believed was a well, though no rope ever drew water from it. Its rim was low, polished black, and forever damp. Even in summer, Mira had once told us it was not a well, but a mouth, and only now, years later, did we understand what she meant. As we approached, we saw it had changed. The rim now bore handprints, hundreds of them, layered like whispers. Some large, some barely the size of a child's palm, all pressed into the black stone as though left in soft clay. Now hardened, permanent. Each print faced inward. The bowl inside had filled, not with water, but with soundless shimmer, a mist that danced in ripples when we neared it. Though no wind touched it, the shimmer pulled toward us, not aggressively, but longingly, like breath reaching home after a long exhale. Mira stepped forward. Her shadow did not fall across the well. It was swallowed, and she did not speak. She only placed her hand on the nearest print, one worn and deep, and closed her eyes. A hush fell that did not feel like silence, but like a room where something was about to be born. We did not kneel. We did not bow. We stood still and let the shimmer listen. No one gave the signal, but we each approached the rim, one at a time, and placed our hand upon a print that seemed to recognize us. The moment my palm touched that cold stone, I felt warmth rise not from the surface, but from beneath, as if the hand beneath mine was still there, waiting, and something passed between us. Not language, not emotion, but confirmation, like two halves of a single breath finally meeting again. As we stood, the shimmer thickened and lifted, rising from the bowl not in smoke, but in form. A shape began to emerge, not distinct, not monstrous or divine, but familiar. Shoulders, then a chest, ribs, a pulse, a body not of matter, but of everything we had left unsaid across generations. The shimmer figure hovered, still forming, and then the sound came. It was not heard through ears, but through skin, a pressure along the spine, a vibration behind the teeth. It sounded like old wood stretching in firelight, like snow melting too fast on a tin roof, like a sigh you'd been holding for years. And somehow, it spoke our names, all of them, not aloud, not even in thought, but in recognition. We didn't answer. We couldn't. The shimmer figure bent forward, as if inhaling, and the wind around the hollow responded, rising, circling, drawing every scent, every breath, every bit of us into the space between. We felt our names not vanish but dissolve. They didn't disappear. They became part of the god, One final moment lingered before it all faded. The shimmer collapsed back into the bowl, the warmth into stone, the wind into hush. But something had stayed inside each of us, behind the ribs. A weight had shifted. We hadn't summoned the god, we had returned it. Not with candles, not with sacrifice, but with silence and breath and the long walk back to where we had once belonged. The hollow wasn't holy, it was home. We returned from the hollow of returning, just as the first frost began to lift pale tendrils of mist, hovering over fields like spirits reluctant to leave. Our journey home carried no trumpets, no regular triumph, only the gentle cadence of our footsteps and the quiet hum behind our ribs that still lingered, reminding us of what had unfolded in that secret basin. By the time we emerged back into the village, the sun was dipping low, painting the huts in long golden shadow, as if the land itself paused to exhale at our return. Families gathered by hearth fires, drawn to light and warmth, yet their eyes met ours with a hush of awareness, as though they sensed something had shifted irrevocably within us, just as it had within the land. That evening, Mira didn't call a formal gathering. Instead, she walked through the lanes, from hut to hut, carrying a small wooden bowl carved with spirals that seemed to echo breath. In each home, she left the bowl at the foot of a threshold or tucked into the cradle of an infant. A simple invitation to sit, to hold, to breathe an embodied echo of what we'd lived. She never spoke of it aloud, but by dawn, nearly every household had drawn water from the ash stream, added a pinch of snowmelt or the faintest scrap of moss, and returned the bowl to her beneath the ash tree. It sat in the grass, humming not with sound, but with expectant resonance, as if it had become the heart of something still beating a way station for memory to flow back into everyday life. At midday, Mira stood before the circle of stones and spoke for the first time since our return. Her voice was low, steady, like water moving over smooth river stones. And without raising herself to a pulpit, she commanded the attention of the village by the sheer magnetism of her calm certainty. We breathed the god into being. She began, her fingers tracing the spirals carved in the front of her tunic. But that is only half the living. Now, we must breathe the god through us. Each and every day, in acts that no one else will see, but will shape the world nevertheless. I watched sparks from hearth fires drift into her words, so even the night felt part of her telling, as though she had called it forth to witness. She instructed us to bring forth objects from our daily toil fragments of past lives that carried weight, not because they were grand, but because they were worn, loved, remembered. A chipped cooking bowl, a child's toy carved in tooth, a leather pouch once carried through war, a fallen comb left on a last night's pillow. We laid these around the ash tree bowl, like offerings, but not to placate something distant, rather, to feed the bond we'd forged between flesh and breath, between bone and story. One by one, we knelt and spoke quietly to our chosen pieces. A man whose hand trembled explained that he once failed to save a friend by the riverbank. A woman confessed her burning grief at her mother's death, still unspoken in daylight. The wind carried their words in gusts not heard, but felt through earth and moss, into smoke wisps, and up into the pale copper sky. When my turn came, I pressed my palm to a cracked wooden bowl, reminding it of laughter shared at harvest, of tears shed at separation, of all the fragile history stacked within me, that the god now embraced as belonging to itself. Then Mira took the bowl from the ash stream, the carved spiral bowl she'd carried the night before, and began to pour its contents onto the objects below. The liquid seeped into splinters of wood, into bits of bone, leather, and soot. Steam rose, swirling in spirals around us, and as the warm vapors curled upward, I realized they carried breath not ours alone, but old breaths. New breaths, unspoken breaths, woven together into a tapestry of memory, made holy not by gods, but by shared experience. Underneath my feet, the ground pulsed, gentle as the pulse under a dead throat finding life. And I thought I heard it beneath the stone, beneath the soil, beneath our very breaths, the same chorus that haunted the hollow. Not voices, but acknowledgement. Mira's face remained calm, her eyes reflecting starlight in the twilight of her mind. She raised her hand, as if cupping something unseen, and I felt something shift, something subtle, but profound, like the world's memory had returned home. Unexpectedly, a single feather drifted down, landing on the edge of the cracked bowl. Others followed, dozens at first, then hundreds, each spiral of downlight floating, guided in silent choreography by wind that had once hardened into hush. They brushed hair, draped around bowls, embroidered a web across the threshold. The children gasped, their eyes widening, mouths opening just enough to let a breath escape. I watched the feather from my object drift back into my palm, where a fallen twig once lay, and in that moment, I recognized the gesture. The god had breathed itself back into the world, through every living thing, binding what we had offered with what continued to grow. Mira spoke then not in sentences, but in a pure intention that we felt even in our bones. This is our covenant now, not sealed with flame, but with breath and remembrance, carried onward by our waking acts. She lifted her staff, carved with spirals like ripples across water, and touched it to the ground. The ash tree behind her shuddered, not breaking, not cracking further, but blooming anew across its bark with spiral rims of golden sap. We gasped again, life, made visible, saying, "We are more than what sleeps beneath our ribs." Night had fallen fully by the time each household carried a feather back home, tucked into cradles, placed in hearth corners, laid inside looms, combs, saddlebags, tiny tokens that said the sacred lived not only in ritual, but in everyday breath. My own feather rests on the windowsill at home now. Backlit each dawn, it doesn't glow, but it remembers that our bones can be altars, that our memories can be prayers, that the God we revived is none other than life itself, breathing through our stories. By the time the fireflies rose, dancing like sparks of old lightning across the field, the night felt expectant rather than still, as if the world were breathing with us again. Mira sat beneath the ash tree's new spiral of sap and carved staff. She closed her eyes and inhaled deeply, the cold air slipping into her lungs and nourishing something that went beyond body and bone. And I watched and I breathed, because this wasn't the end of something sacred. It was the beginning not of summoning, but of living the sacred every time we took a breath. We awoke the morning after the feather covenant to a dawn thick with mist, as though the world itself exhaled slowly into the first light, hesitant to resume its old rhythms. The village was quiet, not empty but humming, each hut and hearth whispering with subtle resonance, as if the feather covenant hadn't ended at the fading of fireflies, but had woven itself into the heartbeat of every dwelling. When I stepped outside, I noticed how the familiar became strange. The well by the communal fire now reflected not only the sky, but flickers of something deeper, spinning veils of mist curling just beneath the surface. No breeze stirs, yet they move. The threshing floor was rimmed with frost-laced footprints, tracing patterns reminiscent of the path from the hollow curves and spirals I recognized even without seeing where they began or ended. Even our goats, who once drifted about aimlessly, now grazed in silent concentric circles, their hooves carving shallow spirals in the dew-soaked earth. It was as though everything now moved to the rhythm of breath, synchronized, unspoken. That morning, Mira did not summon us. Instead, we found the circle of stones transformed. The ash bowl, once stilled in twilight, now glowed with an inner warmth, faint but persistent, pulsing at intervals like a living heart buried just below the surface. Around it lay feathers delicate, pale, more than we had thought possible, arrayed not randomly, but in concentric rings. Each ring had grown inward since last night, so that the smallest circle now enclosed the bowl. Like a nest securing an egg, the mist hovered low there, brushing against our ankles as we approached, not cold, but expectant, waiting for an offering. By midday, the elders gathered beneath the ash tree, now wholly healed, its fissure sealed by golden sap, forming spirals that we'd come to recognize as symbols of return and rebirth. Homesick children pressed a finger against each glowing swirl, wide-eyed, as though the bark carried a story only their small hearts had known for lifetimes. Mira stood among them, silent, watching, but not intervening. It was as though the village itself was his altar now, and even the youngest among us sensed that something was shifting deeper than ritual. At her signal, a simple touch on the ash bowl's rim, each of us offered up a current burden. Not objects this time, but promises. I heard Edda vow to plant 3 trees for each tree felled this coming year. Bren swore to teach the children our old lullabies, so that memory would not slip from study into silence. Alaric, the smith, promised to forge tools with each new moon and leave one out for those in need. When my turn came, I pressed my palm to the bowl and whispered that I would speak my mother's name each night, even though she was gone from the living, so that the lineage of softness, that place where grief shapes us, would breathe through me. The bowl pulsed with warmth under our hands. The mist quickened, rising to our waists as if to touch the promises we spoke, as though they, the breath of our future, had heard. We lingered in that space, under the ash's golden spiral sap, until the sky was dull bronze. Then Mira, without removing her hand, began to breathe in a guiding rhythm, long, deep, rhythmic, and those of us still with empty hands followed, syncing our inhale and exhale to hers. The circle thrummed in unison, our breaths coalescing, drawing the mist upward into a spiral column that rose above the bowl. The mist twisted into shapes we couldn't name, vague limbs, faces made of vapor, fingers that flexed then dissolved. It felt like witnessing memory shape itself into vessel and then collapse back. Renewed, when the breathing ended, the mist fell softly, settling around the circle like dew. And there, at the center, lay something entirely new, soft soil, dark and rich, bearing a single seed the size of a pebble. It had not been there when we began, nor had any of us touched the soil beneath the bowl, but the earth felt settled around it, snug and waiting, part promise, part testament to what we'd planted not with hands, but with breath, memory, and intention. Over the next days, that seed became our vigil. We tended it softly under the ash tree, watering it with ash stream water, shading it from sun and ice, whispering breath memories as though the plant could understand. New roots struck deep, fir shoots broke the earth. The village shifted around it. People paused in midday tasks to watch for growth. Children brought stems and blossoms they'd found elsewhere, laying them at its base as though offering kinship. Even the goats left clear paths, grazing around it rather than near, as if honoring the new life. It changed our days. We woke with purpose, not to farm or repair or survive alone, but to witness emergence. Every sunrise became an offering. Every breeze felt like an echo of collective breath. In kitchens, women sang low songs. In fields, men paused mid-sickle to hold a breath. We planted seedlings of oats and beans ourselves, not just for sustenance, but as gestures of alignment, growth rooted in remembrance, rooted in breath carried through bone and story. At night, the seedling glowed faintly when moonlight touched it, its slender stem shining like it held water inside. Though I never saw moisture, it pulsed slowly, and when I placed my palm above its leaves, I felt warmth not from the soil, but from beneath, like the heartbeat of that God we'd reclaimed, now breathing through green life. So when Mira finally spoke again, 2 weeks after we returned with feathers, I realized she no longer carried her staff. Instead, in her hand was a slender branch from the ash tree, harvested from the healed fissure, carved again with spirals of golden sap. She stood under the tree as we gathered, silent not out of ritual, but out of reverence. She placed the branch against the young plant. Its sap-dripped spirals caught moonlight, and the plant trembled as though recognizing a parent's touch. In that tremor, everyone present felt it. The God was no longer inside the well, or in our bones. Its presence was emergence itself, from seed, from sap, from story. We exhaled all together, our breath rippling through the leaves, through something larger. Children laughed, an elder wept. In that moment, I understood. We were not simply witnesses to the sacred. We were its ongoing verses. Emergence is continuous. Remembrance is antidote to erasure. Breath is not ours alone, but the world's. So we planted again oak seedlings beside the young shoot, berries around its base, moss to hold moisture, feathers to guard the sacred grove budding beneath our ribs. That night, under shifting stars, we slept, knowing the journey wasn't complete, not because the god needed more, but because we needed to keep walking with each breath. The dawn that followed the planting of the ash sap branch into the young sprout arrived with an unexpected gift. Light, not the pale glow of morning mist, but something warmer, richer, almost golden, as though the air itself had been steeped overnight. I stepped outside my hut into a yard dappled with sunlight that didn't feel borrowed. It felt earned. Someone had written this day. Through collective breath and quiet promise, a clarity hovered in the edges of the world. Even the dew-drenched grasses leaned toward the rising sun, their tips trembling as though greeting an old friend. Word spread slowly, wordless even, until we all converge beneath the ash tree, drawn by a current too subtle for sense but carried deep within our bones. The sap branch we'd planted had grown taller almost overnight, its spirals now reaching knee-height, each golden ridge glowing softly in the growing light. It wasn't just a plant any longer, it was a pillar of emergence, an arboreal column bridging earth and sky. We watched it in awe, none of us daring to breathe too loudly, as though the smallest exhale might shatter something sacred. Mira appeared from the eastern path, carrying a vessel carved from clay and etched with spirals that mirrored those on the branch. She set it down at the base of the trunk without ceremony, then gently poured its contents water, ash stream dust, crushed petals over the roots. The earth responded with a soft trill, like metal struck in water, and the spirals on the branch shimmered. Mira watched, her face calm, but I felt the tremor in her palm as she touched the bark, a human echo beneath divinity. Then she lifted her head, and in the hush that followed I realized it was not we who had found the branch, but the branch that had found us. That we were now vessels receiving something beyond name, beyond time. It was light, it was emergence, it was life remembering itself. At midday, the entire village gathered not just near the ash, but radiating outward into the orchard and fields beyond. Without instruction, we formed a ring. Children sat cross-legged at the edge of the grass. Elders stood under the shading branches. Young ones hovered where stone met soil. No one spoke, but the ring pulsed with energy-synced breath. Wide-eyed, expectant, Mira walked into the circle, her staff left leaning against the tree now, its spiraled sap arm resting against the pillar it had helped birth. She began to sing, not melody, but a soft hum, lullaby deepened by memory. The branch swayed in harmony, though no wind stirred. Leaves glinted like fine-spun hair, each pulse of hum reflecting light in microscopic waves. As she sang, she walked the circle, placing her hand on each person's shoulder, palm pressing gently. I felt warmth there, and in my chest I heard it too, the steady pulse of that living column. When her hum ended, she did not speak with words. Instead, she held up her palm, her fingers tracing the spiral pattern, and exhaled long. In that single breath, the branch's leaves quivered, the orchard hush deepened, and something else awakened. Light, not sunlight, but something interior, glimmering beneath each participant's ribs. I felt it, a wakefulness, warm as honey, like discovering an ember newly lit within. She then invited us to gather offerings, but not objects this time. She asked for light for us to bring our inner clarity, our small fires, our whispered hopes. We sat, open-handed, and Mira guided us through a ritual of breath. Breathe in. Remember a joy. Breathe out. Release a sorrow. Breathe in. Recall your greatest surprise. Breathe out. Free your deepest regret. With each exhale, the golden column pulsed stronger. The richer our stories, the brighter its glow. When I exhaled my final sorrow, my fear that the sacred journey might fracture me, I felt a warmth gather around my heart. I dared to open my eyes and saw that every person in the ring had been bathed in golden light, not shining, but softened, illuminated from within. We'd offered our breath not to a god, but through a living way of being. In the muted hush that followed, the branch emitted a clear tone, thin, pure as though the pillar itself had sung our offering back at us. Leaves lifted, spirals spiraled, and I heard voices in that tone, not echoes, but answering chorals, a mother's lullaby, a child's laugh, elders' hums that had been drowned in old forgetting, all layered together, unbidden, harmonious. Mira smiled then, the corners of her eyes bright with relief. She spoke at last, her words as weightless as mist but dropping into us like seeds. "Light is not for show," she said, "but to live by. Let each sunrise carry this golden breath into your days. Let each shadow you pass be softened by it, chronicled not on tablets, but in how you face dawn." We stood and filed into pairs, sharing moments of stillness, placing palms to hearts, offering smiles backlit by inner light. I found Elder, the boy who first mirrored the carved mist hands beneath the ash. His eyes were wide, glistening. For the first time since our journey, I heard him speak in full voice. "It sings," he said, like my mother when she remembered my name. The hush around us held. Then, we sprang into gentle applause, not loud, not jubilant, but full of pure, unguarded joy. As evening neared, the golden glow faded with the sun, but only outwardly. In darkness, we lit no torches, yet the village paths glimmered softly, where each household had placed a single candle by their doorway. The Church of Light had no sermon, just vigil, each flame catching the shape of spiraled light beneath the glass. I returned home under that golden dusk and felt its quiet extension in my chest. Children played in the yard. Parents folded quilts. Even the dogs padded with soft steps. In the warmth of my home, I placed my hand on the doorframe and felt the faint vibration of presence, not distant, but immediate, woven into wood. Breath, memory, and life. As I closed my eyes that night, I breathed in gold, awareness of how light and breath had become our covenant. The pillar outside gleamed beneath moonlight, promising a dawn we'd share not because of faith, but because we had lived with the sacred in each exhale. That night, I slept not in silence, but in the subtle harmonic hum of golden breathing, a lullaby sung not by gods, but by us, the living embodiment of our own reclaimed memory. The breath of ancestors. We awoke the morning after the gathering of light to something we almost couldn't name. The world felt older, as though each sunrise carried not only our own breath, but the breath of countless generations. When I stepped outside, the orchard glowed with dew-laced petals that shimmered golden in the dawn, and even the humming in the air, usually silent, felt like whispered memory, a half-remembered lullaby sung beneath roots and stone. Children lingered longer over their morning milk. Elders paused in doorways, hands pressed to steaming coffee bowls, listening as though waiting for a voice. And beneath it all, the pillar of golden sap branch pulsed gently, brightening when passed by, humming when approached. It was a living tether linking our present to whatever had come before. That day, Mira called us to the open field at the village's edge, the place where we once stored harvest bundles under the sky's wide embrace. Straw bales still lay in golden piles, but now the field smelled of wildflowers pushing through fall soil, and the breeze carried a distant echo of ancestral song not heard with ears, but felt behind the sternum, like warmth traveling through wood. We arranged ourselves in a wide circle around a freshly plowed patch. The turned earth, dark and expectant, looked like a blank page waiting to receive our collective story. Without speaking, we each carried something. A ribbon from a long-forgotten pole, the cracked frame of a weaver's loom, an old sheep's bell dulled by weather, a stone from the spring's original runnel. Every piece was weathered, some nearly unrecognizable, but all held weight. We placed them on the field's border, weaving a ring of artifacts, a physical echo of what breath and memory had begun internally. As the sun climbed, savored by impossible clarity, Mira stepped to the center with her daughter, Lil. The girl held a conch shell rimmed with spirals and gold leaf, hand-painted by the children after the gathering, symbolizing the intertwining of new life and ancient breath. The shell trembled slightly in Lil's grasp. Not wind, but anticipation. Mira dipped her fingers in the ash stream water and drew an arc of moisture across the plowed earth. The field responded. Tiny shoots, just a hint of green, broke through the fresh furrows. The soil trembled not from earthquakes, but from recording, as though each seed lodged itself in memory and suddenly remembered where to sprout. Mira handed the shell to me, and with trembling voice soft as dusk I blew. The exhalation wasn't a sound. It was a ripple, felt in the soil, in the spine, in the haze that hovered above the fields. Immediately, The ring of artifacts vibrated in place. Ribbons waved upward. Stone shuddered. Bell jingled softly. Shell pulsed luminous. Then others followed, blowing through whatever they held. A bowl carved from oak. A tarnished cup. A pottery shard painted by a lost artisan. With each breath, something remembered. The pivot of a weaver's wrist. The sheep's bell in pastures at dawn. The hands that shaped clay or ribbon and gifted it forward. And the field exhaled back. A breeze carved spirals across the row, flattening furrows into patterns too precise to be random spirals. Concentric circles, lines reaching outward as though pushing roots deeper. When it was over, the field settled. We could see the outline of a symbol, not alien, but deeply familiar and echo beneath the furrows. A spiral of spirals, breathing into the earth. Mira stood barefoot in the dirt, tears glimmering at the corners of her eyes. Not sorrow, but grief mingled with wonder. She touched the spiral on the ground and said, "These seeds, they remember. Our hands planted them, but our breath awakened them." We went home that evening under a sky splashed with crimson and purple, trailing the scent of wild mint and turned soil. Fireflies weaved through the orchard, a living starlight, and our homes glowed softly from within. In my hut, I unwrapped the conch shell and hung it over the hearth. It didn't make a sound, but when I touched its ridges, I felt the soil's remembered pulse in my palm. That night, sleep came in waves, echoes of furrowing fields, of wind in tall grass, of pulses beneath the roots, and in dreams, I traced the spiral in sleep's dark. Not an equation or a drawing, but a map leading from the ploughed field into deep earth, past buried jars of seed, past ancestors' bones and names eroded by time, until it reached a cavern lit by breath where each exhale we had offered lay suspended in amber light. I awoke to children calling me out. They stood in the orchard, pointing toward the field. We rushed there, stumbling slightly on dew-slit grass, to discover the sprouted spiral glowing softly, moss-edged and dew-luminous. Little shoots, hundreds, all aligned in the shape we breathed into the earth. A spiral of life, breathing back to us in green. The villagers stood silent around it. Some wept, some whispered thanks. I felt their gratitude not in gesture, but in hum beneath the soles of our feet. It was not a miracle, it was memory restored. Mira emerged from the elder council the next morning, holding a bowl of fresh soil and a young shoot from the spiral sprout. In her quiet voice, she said, "We have awakened not one field, but many. Each breath we offer can guide growth, restore what was lost. But we must continue our relationship with the land as living, and it demands our presence." That afternoon, we began surveys in the orchards, the pastures, the thresholds of the village. We breathed into saplings, into seed stores, into even stones in the well and smoke in chimneys. With each inhale and exhale, the world pulsed softly. Roots stretched deeper, blossoms stirred beneath buds, sap flowed upward in hidden veins. By nightfall, songs rose through lanes, not taught old lullabies echoing with new purpose, melodies unspoken by elder ears but stirring bones all the same. The pillar under the ash tree glowed golden enough to cast lace-like shadows across the field gate. I closed my eyes and breathed, not only for me, but for all those who had shaped the earth before, for shy children planting seeds by trembling hands, for mothers weeping over empty cooking pots, for hands lying still at deathbeds, unable to exhale their final breath. I breathed for them, and beneath me, I felt the field tremble not violently, but like recognition, like a spine adjusting. It was as though every planted breath we carried was a thread, woven into the tapestry that held us all. Mortal and memory, seed and song, breath and becoming, the dawn of the final day broke soft and pale, as though the whole world held its breath in reverence. When I stepped outside, the air felt lighter, yet charged. Each inhalation tasted of promise and ancient earth. I could already hear the hum, not from the pillar or the fields, but from every footstep, every opening door, every exhalation rising from the village like gathering wind. We had woven ourselves into something larger than stone or tree, larger than story. Now it was time to live with that breath, each of us carrying the whispers of hope, memory, and becoming in our bones. In the glow of morning, Every house their hearth smoke now tinged with lavender from the shared herb beds reflected a world in transition. Wildflowers bloomed unexpectedly at thresholds, moss climbed stone walls in gentle patterns, and lanterns hung at doorways glimmered before the sun even climbed the sky. Even our animals moved differently. Chickens paused, their heads tilting as though listening. Goats and sheep clustered near the young spiral field, grazing quietly yet deliberately, as if honoring some invisible invitation. The land, awake and watching, had already begun to transform with us. By mid-morning, the community circle convened beneath the ash tree, now fully healed and emanating strength not just through sap spirals, but through its stillness. Mira stood among us, wearing a simple garb woven by Lil and the weavers of the village, threads of undyed wool embroidered with faint golden swirls, echoing the spiral motif we had breathed into the world. She carried no staff, only a woven basket lined with soft moss. Inside lay seeds apple, barley, nightshade, wildflower, all gathered from the restored spiral field. She stepped forward silently and, without explanation, placed the basket at the base of the tree, letting the seeds roll trickle by tiny trickle across the bark's golden swirls, each seed finding its own groove until the basket emptied and lay bare, a gesture of offering without ceremony, trusting that the earth would receive it. A hush fell, and then, one by one, we followed. Each villager came forward, bringing a small package, grain saved over time, a clump of root, a cutting from a single rose, even a metalled necklace carried for journeys. Each offering was placed into the basket, woven now not of moss but of intention, until it brimmed with collective abundance. When the last piece was laid, the basket glowed faintly, as though absorbing centuries of care and hope. Mira lifted the basket and walked toward the spiral field, her pace unhurried, measured, as if planting stories with each step. We followed, careful of footfalls, until we reached the living spiral, the sap branch turned pillar, glowing strong. At its base, amid shoots and swirling leaves, she gently emptied the basket, letting seeds tumble into the soil. As each seed hit earth, the ground heaved softly, tiny shoots rising even before they were buried. Some burst in pale outlines, others in tender green all beneath moon and sun. One seed skipped into a crack, and immediately a blossom erupted around it, violet petals shining in midday sun. It was as though the land was responding, not magically, but through deep remembrance, absorbing our gesture and amplifying it. We moved in silence, hearts lifted by wonder and humility. Mira knelt and pressed both palms to the soil. "This is our covenant," she said, voice low as the wind stirring grass. "Not sealed by oath, but by breath and by the turning of seasons. We plant with intention, care with presence, harvest with gratitude, and return what we leave behind in the form of legacy, not of stone or story, but of growing things." Later, as sun dipped toward evening, we made our way back to the community circle for the final gathering. Fires burned in large clay bowls, flanked by benches handmade by the smiths. We took places in a living donut, hearth, humans, circle. Mira walked around us carrying a horn. Each of us was invited to breathe into it just one inhalation, then one exhale. As air passed through, the horn responded with a low resonance, not musical, but corporeal, felt in teeth, bones, airways. One by one, village breaths layered into a low chorus, a single sustained exhalation echoing out over the field and carried upward by evening breeze. When the horn sounded its final ring, it shattered into 1,000 spirals, not wood, not shell, but fine bark fragments that wafted upward. At first, they scattered randomly, but soon coalesced into a gentle whirlwind, circling through the village, brushing walls, touching faces, drifting toward open windows. They bore flecks of light, tiny motes like starlight, wherever the fragments touched. New moss began to grow overnight. Windowsills sprouted green, hearths sprouted tiny shoots, doors glowed with life because life had been breathed into them. Not by gods, but by us, our breath, our tending, our memory and care. Finally, we walked home in pairs, 3 by 3, barefoot on softened grass, carrying just the weight of dusk, and the warmth of possibility. I returned to my hut, and as I stepped inside, I exhaled fully and felt something shift behind my sternum like a door closing gently, not with finality, but with trust. The last embers of light moved through the air, settling like dust motes in golden ray. I closed my eyes, touched my chest, and felt the echo of breath inside me clearer than ever and acknowledged. The God we resurrected on our pilgrimage was not a deity distant in sky or sea, but the whisper in every breath, the memory in every seed, the covenant in every living pulse. In that stillness, I drifted to sleep in the hush of what we had become, a living story, not bound to endings, but unspooling through each sunrise, each seed, each exhaled intention. And in that place, even if tomorrow we awaken with cold dawn and impossible work, we will do so carrying the breath of ancestors, the pulse of community, and the promise of emergence. And that, perhaps, is the most sacred story we could ever tell. The morning after the final gathering arrived with an unsettling quiet. No birdsong, no children's voices, no stirring at the horizon. Instead, there was only the sound of breath moving through long grass and the faint pulse of life beneath the earth. I stepped outside to feel a world pause between heartbeats, as though the landscape itself was taking one last inhale before exhaling into what comes next. The spiral field glowed faintly under dawn's hush, the sap branch pillar still standing tall, its spiral sap ridges lit by a glow that seemed to come from within rather than from the sky. It looked like a living lighthouse guiding us outward. Walking toward the community circle, I passed houses touched by moss and seed-sprouted windowsills. Smoke from hearths rose in lazy spirals of lavender and thyme, as if the land cradling our breath had shaped every wick, every coil of smoke. At the circle's edge, Mira waited, not with ritual implements, but with her hand on her daughter's shoulder, both gazing east. Beyond them rose rolling hills dotted with wild oaks and spring-fed streams, a shifting tapestry of possibility rippling beneath the morning's gentle hush. She didn't beckon. Instead, she posted a soft question into the open air. What if this is only the beginning? And though no words followed, the question unfurled deeper than logic. It carried invitation, a breath wanting to expand. We responded not with speech, but by stepping forward. Together, we formed a line, walking slowly toward the edge of the circle, toward the open fields beyond. There were no objects, no offerings in hand, only the weight of the journey behind us, the songs we breathed, the seeds we planted, and the silent understanding that the world we reclaimed didn't end in backyards or ceremonies. It extended to horizon lines we had only glimpsed through steam and smoke. As we walked, each step pulled something from the ground, a shimmer of morning dew, a broken twig, a ribbon of cloud overhead, a shaft of light on the hillside. It was as if the world was scattering fragments of itself into our path, asking us to follow outward. We did, letting the fragments pause in our open hands, studying them, breathing them in, and then releasing them gently back to the grass, the air, the soil, a spiral of gestures of hold and let go that echoed the breathwork we'd lived throughout this journey. Somewhere beyond the nearest ridge, Lil's laughter rose on the breeze, not because she found play, but because she realized how far our path could travel. Even a child's breath contains horizon. She trotted ahead and stood at a vantage point, where fields became forests and sky met haze. She raised a hand and let it fall, and we watched as grass bent into a concentric ripple carried further than we could see. It passed over hills, coursed through valleys, touched riverbanks. Our breath, made visible, Mira turned and met my eyes. I realized I wasn't looking at a leader of a ritual. I was looking at someone who stood at the edge of an unspoken covenant, that the sacred isn't held in wells or altars, but carried by living. That breath is always stepping toward more. She didn't instruct me. She offered her hand. We walked together, and I followed her outward, each step imprinting something invisible into the world. We reached a stone marker that had stood at the circle's edge for generations, weathered and almost forgotten. Moss hid its spiral carvings. Mira touched it. With her breath, she cleared the moss, revealing the spirals beneath. Then, she sank to one knee and scraped a depression in the soil at its base. Without hesitation, she knelt deeper, uncurling the soil with fingers and filling the hollow with seeds, peppergrass, clover, wild flax, oats. I joined her, and so did other villagers 2 by 2. We planted wild tongues of seed around the rock marker, forming a living spiral, Mira whispered. Our breath planted this, let our future walk by it. We rose together and traced the spiral with steady steps, turning inward and outward. In silence, we touched each seed-touching footfall with remembrance. Inward to memory, outward to future days we would never walk. The spiral grew green beneath dawn's sun. By midday, the fields beyond the village had begun to respond. Grass flattened where footprints passed. Buds opened along the spiral's arms. Butterflies laid eggs unseen. The earth softened under hooves and fingertips alike. We looked with awe, but not surprise. This was our world speaking back to us, not magically, but remembering itself always. Life remembers. That evening, as golden haze draped the fields, the villagers rebuilt belated hearth cairns at the well, the spiral field, the marker. Into each they placed a pebble, a feather, a ribbon, tokens of this last day, an anchoring of memory and promise. Flames flickered at each cairn. Low and steady, 2 children lit theirs with trembling hands, and among adults, I watched tears surfacing in eyelids. Not sorrow, but gratitude for breath-filled stories that would now carry beyond their final day. When night fell, the trail of fire-led cairns formed a glowing spiral arc toward the horizon. We stood on a grassy ridge, watching the pattern flicker and fade beneath moonlight. I realized then that the god erased from history was not forgotten and never belonged to history. It belonged to us, a breath at the beginning of everything and the end. A living spiral drawn each morning with our bone and story. A vow laid under sky-lashed air and pulling toward horizon. I closed my eyes and breathed. In that moment, I heard Lil's hushed chant drifting through dreamlight. We breathe, the world breathes, breath is our story. And I understood, this story is not done. It continues with each inhale we take, each seed we plant, each rib-shaped memory we carry forward. Our covenant with the sacred lives not only in ritual, but in the breath we carry beyond the horizon. Thank you truly. Thank you for walking this journey with us. If you're hearing these words at the end of a long day, maybe with a soft light glowing beside your bed, please know you are not alone. Together, we've traveled through breath and memory from the first quiet stirrings of ancient people to the rediscovery of a forgotten god. Not through grand temples or violent myths, but through the simple act of remembering, of planting, of breathing, of being. This wasn't a story of war or kings. It was about something quieter and deeper. A god not worshipped but lived. A god erased not because they were weak, but perhaps because they were too close, too present in wind, in soil, in the silence we rarely listen to. And if this story touched something in you, a faint memory, a quiet ache, a moment of stillness, we'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment. What did this god mean to you? Have you ever had a sacred breath moment in your own life? Subscribe to our channel if you'd like to hear more gentle, soul-stirring stories from history, the kind that help you sleep, dream, and feel just a little more connected. And if there's someone you once loved, someone who may be gone but still lingers softly in the breeze, leave a below, a simple light, a breath remembered. Wishing you a peaceful night, and if your eyes are closing now, may you dream of spiral fields and golden air where every breath is a seed of memory and hope. We'll see you again in the next story.